You know, when you think about the popes of the 20th century, a few big names probably pop into your head, right? John Paul II, maybe Pius XII. But what about the pope who had to lead the Catholic Church through the absolute chaos of World War I? Today, we're going to look at the story of Pope Benedict XV, a man whose entire time as pope was shaped by one of the biggest disasters in human history.
I mean, just think about that label for a second. The least remembered pope. This is a guy who was in charge from 1914 to 1922, a time that completely redrew the map of the world. And yet, even though he was right there in the middle of it all, he's kind of just faded from history.
And that's the big question we're going to tackle. He himself called the Great War the suicide of civilized Europe, and he spent pretty much every waking moment trying to stop it. So how on earth does a figure that central become, well, a historical footnote? The answer, it turns out, is way more fascinating than you'd expect. Okay, so to really get who this guy was, we have to rewind to the very start of the war. It's August 1914. Armies are mobilizing all across the continent, and right then, Pope Pius X dies. So the cardinals have to come to Rome facing this unbelievable crisis. They need to pick a new leader for a church whose members were now literally trying to kill each other on the battlefield.
The man they ended up choosing was Giacomo della Chiesa. Now, he was a very experienced Vatican diplomat, which makes sense. But get this, he'd only been a cardinal for 3 months. 3 months! You can tell they were looking for a skilled negotiator, not necessarily a theologian, to try and steer the ship through this storm.
And that election was anything but easy. The College of Cardinals was basically split right down the middle. You had the conservatives on one side, who wanted to keep the strict anti-modernist policies of the last pope going, and on the other side, you had the liberals, who thought the church desperately needed to change its focus. It took 10 ballots before they finally landed on a compromise: Giacomo della Chiesa, who became Benedict XV.
From the second he became pope, Benedict XV had one single-minded mission: peace. He saw the war exactly for what it was. Not some grand, noble cause, but a useless slaughter that was ripping Europe to shreds. And he would spend the next 4 years trying everything he could think of to make it stop.
His biggest swing came in August of 1917, with what's known as the Papal Peace Note. And this wasn't just some general, hey, can't we all just get along message? No, this was a detailed, practical plan. He was talking about reducing weapons on all sides, using international arbitrators to solve problems, freedom of the seas, and, this is a big one, no one forces anyone to pay massive war damages. Just go back to how things were. It was an incredibly sane and forward-thinking idea.
This quote really gets to the heart of what he believed. For Benedict, peace wasn't just signing a piece of paper. He warned, that a real peace had to be about justice and forgiveness. If you didn't deal with the hatred, he said, the germs of ancient grudges would just sit there, waiting to spark the next war.
So what happened? It was rejected by everyone. His strategy of being strictly neutral totally backfired because both sides just assumed he was secretly helping the other guys. German Protestants were insulted by the idea of a papal peace. The French leader Clemenceau was convinced it was an anti-French scheme. And over in the US, President Woodrow Wilson basically said Germany's leaders couldn't be trusted. To top it all off, Italy had already signed a secret treaty to make sure the Vatican would be shut out of any final peace talks. His diplomacy was dead in the water.
So, if his big push for peace was a total failure, is that why he's so forgotten? Well, not exactly. Because while all the politicians were ignoring his diplomatic plans, Benedict was pulling off a totally different kind of victory, one that might have been even more important. He basically turned the Vatican into a huge humanitarian relief organization. From that very desk, he launched one of the biggest aid efforts the world had ever seen. He even set up a special office just for helping prisoners of war, trying to track them down and connect them with their families. And the sheer scale of what he did is just staggering. Through his work, tens of thousands of POWs were exchanged between warring countries. He personally arranged for 29,000 sick soldiers, many with lung diseases from poison gas, to be moved to neutral Switzerland to recover. And he sent enormous amounts of money for famine relief, over 80 million lira, to places as far-flung as Russia. And if you need proof of his impact, look no further than this. In Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Empire, a Muslim nation, they built a statue of him. The inscription called him the benefactor of all people, irrespective of nationality or religion. That tells you everything. His compassion cut through all the hatred and politics of the war. All right, so we've got a failed peacemaker on one hand, but a wildly successful humanitarian on the other. But there's another piece to this puzzle.
a hidden success that might just be his most important legacy. While the world was busy fighting, Benedict XV was quietly starting a revolution inside the Catholic Church itself.
In 1919, right after the war, he released this document called Maximum Elude. Now back then, Catholic missionary work was all tangled up with European colonialism. Missionaries often went hand in hand with empire. Benedict said no more. He demanded a total separation. The Church's mission, he insisted, had to be completely free of colonial and nationalist goals.
His logic was simple, but it was radical for the time. A missionary is an ambassador of Christ, not a representative of France or Italy or Germany. And crucially, he pushed hard for training local priests and bishops in those mission lands. He was laying the foundation for the Church to stop being a purely European institution and to become a truly global one.
And the shockwaves from that letter are still being felt. Just a few years ago, in 2017, Pope Francis celebrated the 100th anniversary of Maximum Elude. He praised its vision for freeing the Church's message from what he called the disastrous goals of nationalism and colonialism.
So, let's put it all together. We started by asking why this pope is so unknown, and I think the answer is becoming pretty clear. His biggest achievements just weren't the loud, splashy kind of victories that make headlines. He was shut out of the peace talks. His desperate calls to end the war fell on deaf ears, so history kind of just moved on without him. His true legacy lies in two things that were much quieter. First, that massive humanitarian effort that saved who knows how many lives, and second, that revolutionary vision for a global, decolonized church, which really set the course for what the Catholic Church is today.
And that quiet influence didn't just disappear. It echoes all the way into our own time. Think about it. In 2005, when Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger was elected pope, everyone waited to see what name he would pick. He chose Benedict XVI, and he told everyone exactly why. He said he wanted to create a direct link to Benedict XV, honoring him as a courageous prophet of peace who did everything he could to stop the war. So you see, the unknown pope was anything but unknown to the popes who came after him.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. The story of Benedict XV really forces you to reconsider what success even means. Maybe a leader's greatest legacy isn't always found in big treaties or public triumphs, but in those quiet, persistent acts of humanity that end up echoing for 100 years.